Easter Monday, Alleluia. Jesus suffered, died, and is risen in order that we may obtain the glorious freedom of the children of God. We're looking to advance in that freedom in Christ by focusing in today on the mental health side of our earthly lives with mental health professional Dr. Gerry Crete, all within the big picture of our Catholic faith today on The Simple Truth. We do consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of Saint Joseph. I'm Jim Havens. It is Wholeness and Healing Monday, fighting to cultivate the health of the whole person, mind, body, and soul, with our co-host, my lovely wife, Becky Havens. She is a Catholic wife and mother with a passion and calling to educate people about the importance of caring for our bodies that the Lord has blessed us with by living a healthy lifestyle. She helps others to think outside of the cultural norms and to be their own advocate while not falling into the many pressures of modern medicine. She's the author of Toxin Free in 12 Months, a 12-month guide to help you transition over to a toxin-free lifestyle. Also wrote a boycott list of over 600 pro-abortion companies. You can get them both for free. Learn more at her website, safehavensmama.com. Our topic today, relieving post-traumatic stress and anxiety. Always give the disclaimer here that Becky and myself, we're not doctors, we're not scientists, we're just regular people looking to live well and raise our family. We believe in objective truth and in asking questions when things do not make sense. We're not giving medical advice, but we do want to offer a forum here today. We know a thing or two, still a ton we don't know. We do have personal experiences, as do you, and we would love to hear from you. No survey today was sent out, but we will open the phone lines a little bit later in the show if you have any question or comment throughout the show today. But we are following here a part two of a part one that we did last week, all focusing in on this good work of Dr. Gerry Crete, his book, Litanies of the Heart, relieving post-traumatic stress and calming anxiety through healing our parts. SophiaInstitute.com is where find it. And last week we focused in, it was just Becky and I talking about some of the work there, but also diving deep on the topic of healing hidden wounds. And now today we actually have Dr. Crete with us as our guest. We're going to be talking about relieving post-traumatic stress and anxiety, really getting into that book, Litanies of the Heart. Again, you can get it at SophiaInstitute.com. Dr. Gerry Crete, thank you for being here with us today on The Simple Truth. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Great to be here. How are you?
Excellent. All right. Well, we're very, very blessed to have you. And Becky, I gave you an introduction, but haven't heard from you yet. So want to bring you in right now and allow you to get the first question in here for Dr. Crete today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here, Dr. Crete. I feel like this is a really important topic. We were able to go into a little bit of this last week, bringing in some of our personal experiences, and we were blessed to be able to go through some of your book, and just excited to learn from you. I feel like you're just a wealth of knowledge, and I know just about every single person can relate to what you share. So just first off, I'd love for you to share how you got into this type of work.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been a journey for me, honestly. I am originally from Canada, and started out thinking I would be a high school teacher, which I did do for a while and taught history and English and religious education. But I eventually moved into school counseling, and then I eventually did a doctorate. And I thought I was going to study, how children can, receive kind of counseling services at schools in a more effective way, something along those lines. But I eventually, through really looking at my own life and looking at my own passions and starting to do more clinical work with families, that I just discovered that trauma is everywhere, and that we all are experiencing the effects of trauma in our lives in one way or another. And the only way to heal is through relationships, primarily. First of all, relationship with God, relationship with others, but also what I ended up discovering was relationship within ourselves, actually. And so, yeah, it kind of took me on a journey where I just ended up studying trauma, for example, EMDR, which is a pretty effective trauma treatment that really involves the body. So we're not just talking this through, we're actually working with the body and the soul itself, and it's just powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, Jim here. And your book, Litany of the Heart, it's been praised as bringing needed clarity to internal family systems, the internal family systems model for Christians, and as providing fascinating information about a Catholic approach to internal family systems. Can you give us a quick introduction into parts work and internal family systems, IFS, and the good fruit that you have seen in making use of these approaches within a Catholic understanding of the human person?
Yeah, it's a big topic. I'd love to get into it. I was first encountered internal family systems and a number of years ago, and started applying some of the principles, and then eventually, using it more and more. And it really is this idea that within ourselves, in our interior world, that there's a multiplicity, that we have different parts, and they don't have their own separate existence or anything. They're just still us, but we can connect with them, and we can work with them, and we can work on healing our various parts. And so I started using this method, and I couldn't believe how quickly people were experiencing change, positive change, how well people were working with it in session, how well people were finding healing and finding really building better relationships, less reactive relationships with people in their lives. I couldn't believe how well it worked. But then I had all kinds of questions of my own, right? These questions like, well, what does this mean for our faith? Like, how is our faith integrated in this? And is there any evidence in our, 2,000 plus, really 4,000 year history, we include the whole Judeo-Christian story? Like, is there any evidence that we have parts? and what is this self that Richard Schwartz talks about in IFS? And so it led me into this whole journey of exploring, what does our faith say about it, and what does our faith not say about it? And so I really set out to explore in this book, and really show the ways in which it is compatible with our faith, but in the ways that it is also not, and would need to be adapted and would need to be qualified. So I kind of do both things there. I actually deep dived also into the history of parts work, and realizing that parts work really goes back pretty far, not just Richard Schwartz and internal family systems, but was more fully developed in ego state therapy in the 1960s and 70s, but really looking all the way back to, honestly, St. Paul, and that we are, we have the body of Christ has multiplicity, and we ourselves have multiplicity. And St. James talks about war with our members, and even further back than St. Paul and St. James, we have in the Psalms and in Isaiah this talking about God knitting our inward parts and the complexity of our human heart. So I deep dived into all that stuff, and I tried to make it presentable and understandable in this one book.
Yeah, so that's so interesting because, all right, so just trying to break it down in my mind. So if somebody's learning about this sounds like a newer thing, at least in my mind, and especially as Catholics, there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of options out there that Catholics kind of hear about, and they say, all right, is this in line with our faith? Am I able to participate in this? Share a little bit about that, almost because sometimes they want a little bit of scientific evidence that this is okay. You know what I mean? Because a lot of times if I'm talking to other women, they might say like, all right, now I went and I got counseling, but he started going into this strange meditative stuff about, and they're like, the Reiki or some of the stuff tends to be on that side of the spectrum. And so I think a lot of women, particularly I say women because women are more open about talking about feelings or trauma and stuff like that. And they want to get that healing. How can one just feel really good about diving deep into this, how it aligns with faith and maybe a little bit of scientific evidence for them to go into as well?
Yeah. No, happy to explore that. I think with faith, that's one of the main projects in the book really is looking at a whole history of our interior life, beginning in I look at the Old Testament. I work my way up throughout into the New Testament. So the book is really based on the Bible. there's a section in each chapter that's a Bible study that you can like explore. And I try to link, what is the scripture saying to parts. And I'm not doing what some other Christian IFS books have done, which is mostly proof text. I really deep dive into the scriptures, which is what you really need to do. Like deep dive into what the Exodus and Genesis and Exodus stories say about it, and deep dive in a whole chapter on Ephesians or Corinthians or whatnot. And like, so to explore deeply, it's a little hard for me to summarize it, but one key aspect is this concept of the heart and understanding the inmost self. And St. Paul talks about the innermost self, and he talks about the law of my inmost self, and he talks about not doing what he does not want to do. And so he discusses, like, he gets into inner conflicts. And so I really explore all that in this book from the faith perspective of what the scripture says. And I could go on in a moment. I don't know if we're breaking, but I could get into the scientific stuff as well in a moment, if you'd like me to.
All right, great. Yeah, we'll pick it up there when we get back. But we've got Dr. Gerry Crete with us, the book Litanies of the Heart, Relieving Post-Traumatic Stress and Calming Anxiety Through Healing Our Parts. You can get it at sophiainstitute.com, And notice that title, what it says, what it doesn't say. So talking about post-traumatic stress, not post-traumatic stress disorder, which would be clinically diagnosed. Saying here, the thesis really being that we all experience trauma by the very nature of life on earth, post-original sin, personal sin, social sin. And so there's post-trauma for all of us. We're going to be back. Stay tuned. Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Becky Havens, always co-hosting here with me on Wholeness and Healing Monday on The Simple Truth. But we have a special guest with us today as well, Dr. Gerry Crete, author of Litanies of the Heart, Relieving Post-Traumatic Stress and Calming Anxiety Through Healing Our Parts. He's also a mental health professional. You can get his book over at sophiainstitute.com, sophiainstitute.com. And if you have any question or comment for Dr. Crete or anything along these lines of this topic today, we'll give you the phone number in just a little bit, so hang tight. That phone number is coming, so if you have a question or comment, just stay tuned and we'll get that number to you in just a few minutes. But Dr. Crete, where we left off, I guess, was you commenting a bit. You were going to comment a little bit on the science, and then we'll come back with my next question for you, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I've been just mentioning the book really gets deep into the scriptural and the church teachings and so on, and really do try to link it to the catechism and various saints from Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine and some of the key heavy hitters. But from a scientific perspective, even the aspect of trauma and the fact that we have, we all experience some levels of disconnection. I really connect with a lot of the literature around trauma and the way in which our bodies are affected by various traumas that happen to us, even emotional traumas or psychological traumas, not merely physical. So, the book as well, I get into that. I also think I would go deep into attachment theory, which has been well researched, and the idea that when we're babies, we need to attach. And the primary attachment is usually with the mother, and it's with that maternal gaze. It's with that sense that you are connected and you belong, and you're loved, and you experience that initially. So you have the foundation for secure attachment. But then in life, we disconnect various ways. We feel insecure, and then we respond to that sense of insecurity because something happens, something disrupts our sense of safety. And so we become reactive in some way, or we become avoidant in some way. And so those different responses can carry on in our lives unless there's some kind of repair. And so a lot of the work that we're doing with this work in parts and understanding our interior lives is that we're working to do repair inside so that we are deeply connected and we have a sense of safety and security, first of all, within ourselves, between our innermost self and our various parts. But then ultimately that allows us to have a deeper levels of security and safety with other people and ultimately even with God. So it's all about having inner harmony, so that integration inwardly, so that we can love others better, and so that we can have a deeper, more profound relationship with God. And so that's the essential thing. Like in the book, there's the actual Litanies of the Heart prayers, and there's 3 of them. And I think you mentioned that in your other episode, The Wounded Heart. And the whole premise of those prayers is about developing a secure attachment with Christ. And so we start off, if we're the wounded heart, we start off with our anxieties, and we move in that prayer toward a deeper relationship with Christ. We start off by saying, hey, I am anxious. I am a mess, basically. But we invite Christ in, Lord, have mercy. And we invite Christ in, hold me. We invite Christ in. Eventually we come to a deeper connection with him. The science backs that up. There's all sorts of science on attachment and the need to be attached, and what happens when we lose that attachment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have so many big picture questions that I want to ask to try to, get the categories right and to set some things up. But at the same time, I do sense, a good prompting here to just be drawn into, let's get into some of the healing of this, the healing aspects here, and to try to understand that. That's really, I think, what probably a lot of people would be interested in. How do I experience greater healing in these areas? So to me, I think, first of all, we've got to identify that there's actually a need for healing. That's helpful to be consciously aware of that need and then to seek to address it. So I guess if somebody is aware, say they understand that, maybe as a child, they didn't have that connection that would be ideal. In some ways, maybe even they were pretty severely neglected or moderately neglected. They know about this somehow. Maybe even at ages that would be too young for them to remember, but they've been told about their experiences in some way that would lead them to understand this. We went over statistics last week about, how prevalent neglect is towards children, and especially even children ages 1 and younger. And so, I guess to be specific, if somebody knew that they had an issue like that in their background and they believed, I could use some healing in this area, I think it's still affecting me. Or even if, for foster parents, adoptive parents, bringing a child in where it's highly likely or absolutely positive that they have had various traumas, serious traumas in terms of not being able to be attached and being neglected and all of this. How would we approach the healing process, whether it's one person seeking that healing for themselves or parents seeking out that healing for a child that they know they're bringing into their home? And what are some ways, some practical things that we can do for ourselves or for others to help them heal in this area?
Yeah. Well, what you're bringing up is a pretty serious and complex challenge, which is if the trauma and disconnection happened at 1 year old or younger. So that's a much more serious situation. And we have some documentation. I've done some even work clinically with I'm thinking of one client in particular who was in an orphanage in Eastern Europe, and where they literally were not held, and they were basically had a bottle propped up attached to the crib for them to drink, right? And so when you have a situation like that, you typically have something called reactive attachment disorder, which is a pretty serious disorder. You're not going to heal that just from reading my book. I'll be honest. You need a little more help. And the book may be helpful, but you'll need more help than that if you have a serious issue like reactive attachment disorder. Same with if you have a very serious post-traumatic stress disorder. You're right in your comment that I was very purposeful in saying post-traumatic stress, which we all experience, is different than post-traumatic stress disorder. So when you have a more clinically significant issue, you do need to get help from a therapist, from somebody who's trained in working with trauma. But the bottom line, though, is that God made us beautifully, and our brains are beautiful, and our needs and our desires to attach and connect are innate. And so even if the worst thing happened and you didn't receive the care you needed as a child, right, as an infant, or even in the womb sometimes, that there's hope, and there is a way for repair to happen even there. So what you're doing there is you're connecting, and here it's the parts, right? Because if the person's walking around functioning, then they have parts of themselves that are very good at doing something, right? Whether that's their job or just functioning somehow in life, they have parts that are very functional, unless they're literally hospitalized and can't function at all. So, but they also have parts that are very much stuck in that lack of attachment and lack of dealing with or carrying the burden of the lack of connection and that neglect you're talking about. And so what we can do is we can isolate that part, or it might be multiple parts, but we isolate and work on the part of them that is still that little baby. Whether it's in the womb, whether it's 2 months, whether it's 6 months, like whether it was a 6-month-old that was separated from their mother, or whatnot, we can connect even with that part, and we can bring it what it always needed. And that's the premise of all of this work, is that we are connecting with the parts that are stuck in a sense in time, and they are needing something that they always needed. Right now, we may have protectors within ourselves to make sure that we don't go near that, because it's kind of scary, it's kind of overwhelming. And some of those protectors act in maladaptive ways, like we create a wall against other people because we don't trust anybody, or we act out in addiction or act out in some way because we just want to numb pain. We don't want to experience pain. There's lots of ways we try to protect ourselves that don't always really help us, right? They may temporarily, or they may do what they're supposed to do by preventing going deeper. But what we really do need to do is go deeper in order to bring healing and repair. The point of all this trauma work is not to wallow in our trauma or wallow in our pain or anything like that. The point of our work is to actually bring life and bring to those places and bring healing and repair. And so even if it's a 6-month-old that was separated from its mother and doesn't even have an actual memory of that, right? And yet it's somehow manifesting in their life now, then we can connect with those deeper parts, and we can bring them the love and connection and that they always needed. And it's amazing, this work. And it's amazing to see when you discover those parts and you bring them what they need, how they flourish and how they transform. And then the person themselves just experiences new life moving forward. It's profound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I've got follow-up questions, but Becky, I want to get you in here. Becky, what question strikes you?
I think you could go in like a million directions after hearing that, because it's so profound in a way where I bet many people are thinking, okay, I've likely experienced some trauma as a child. Maybe they don't even remember. You know, I know of some people who feel like, I think something happened when I was little. I don't know what, but I have this issue and I'm assuming it's stemming from my childhood, you know? So, or I feel like I'm stuck. I feel like I'm stuck in this year of my life. Is that something that happens where you can have a part of yourself that's kind of stuck in a child level, and that's how you communicate now? And that's just a part that's taken over. You able to get past that, and you kind of communicate as if you're in 3rd grade. Maybe you're afraid all the time, or you can't get out of that situation, whether you're aware of it or not. Can you just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's very complex. And so there's no one answer to this, which is a great question. And so typically my experience is that most of us have these we have multiple personalities. Most of us do not have multiple personality disorder, or what's DID today, what's called DID. Most of us do not have that, although some do. But we all have kind of a multiple personalities. But the ones that are the most wounded, you said like a 3rd grade kind of part, they're usually exiled. They're usually not in our conscious minds. So we're not typically, unless we have DID and we literally have parts acting separate from other parts where we don't even remember them, that's pretty serious. But that's not what I'm really talking about. When we have those exiled parts, they're kind of hidden away in our unconscious mind, or they're not really all that accessible, at least in our normal everyday functioning. And so what we're more often seeing is the protectors that are the parts of ourselves that are protecting us from those exiles. So that's what we most commonly see. However, sometimes we get triggered by extreme emotions and things, and that is the exile kind of like making itself known more typically.
Yes, Dr. Gerry Crete is with us. Again, the book Litany of the Heart And you can get this book by going to sophiainstitute.com, sophiainstitute.com. We're going to have more with Dr. Crete when we get back. If you want to call in any question or comment that you would like to raise today, 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. Highly recommend this book. Great Easter book. Greater life, greater freedom by going through this book, Litanies of the Heart, Relieving Post-Traumatic Stress and Calming Anxiety Through Healing Our Parts. Again, sophiainstitute.com. We're going to be right back with Dr. Crete. Stay tuned.
The Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network presents Saints and Seasons. On April 1st, we celebrate the feast of St. Hugh of Grenoble, Bishop and Confessor. Hugh was born to devout parents in southeastern France in the year of our Lord 1053. His wisdom and piety were such that, while still a layman and under the age of 30, Hugh was chosen to become the new Bishop of Grenoble, a diocese in desperate need of reform. He traveled to Rome to be consecrated by Pope St. Gregory VII himself. Grenoble was in such a poor state that after 2 years, Hugh had made almost no progress, and he resigned to seek solace in a Benedictine monastery until Pope Gregory ordered him to return. Hugh resumed his efforts with far more success and led his flock for the next several decades. In 1084, Hugh granted a tract of wilderness in the Chartreuse Mountains to St. Bruno of Cologne and his companions, where they founded the Order of Carthusians. St. Bruno often had to order Hugh to return to his diocese when he spent too long visiting the monastery. Hugh died in the year of our Lord 1132 and was canonized just 2 years later. He is a patron against headaches, from which he suffered almost continuously for decades. The Carthusians celebrate his feast on April 22nd. Also honored on this day are St. Theodora of Rome, St. Valerie the Abbot, King St. Tudrig, St. Kellic of Armagh, St. Gilbert of Moray, St. Lodovico Pavoni, and many other martyrs, confessors, and holy virgins. For more about the saints and seasons of the Catholic Church, visit thestationofthecross.com/saints and seasons.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim and Becky Havens here. We are talking with Dr. Gerry Crete, our special guest today, about his book, Litanies of the Heart, Relieving Post-Traumatic Stress and Calming Anxiety Through Healing Our Parts. You can get it by going to sophiainstitute.com, sophiainstitute.com. We're going to have Dr. Crete back in just a moment. But again, if you want to call in any question or comment, a great time to do it right now. Phone lines are open, 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. And Becky, we're just working on getting Dr. Crete back with us. Anything so far that really strikes you from what we've heard from Dr. Crete that just particularly stands out for you?
Pretty much everything. In my mind, I feel like it's so fascinating to see how this connects, that like it's possible to have these parts that are unknown. You know what I mean? It makes me think like, all right, what kind of work do I need to do? Where am I stunted? Where do I need to be healed? I actually think it gives a ton of hope to know that there are techniques and different ways, especially as Catholics, to dive deep into healing, starting with the book that he has written. And then I bet there's many ways to go deeper. I think that it is so common for people to be secretly dealing with these type of traumas, whether they're aware or not aware. And it makes it very difficult sometimes to have relationships for ourselves or with others, because that communication is stunted. There's no way to get past that. And so I feel like knowing that this is out there and spreading the word in this can really bring some deep healing to so many people. So I feel like so hopeful that this exists. I'm excited about it. I'm like, I want to learn more. I kind of want to just sit back and hear more. Yeah. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're going to have Dr. Crete back with us in just a moment. But yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. And, it's something where we think an awful lot about the category of advancing spiritually, right? And the life of our soul, and rightly so, right? That, what is it? Gain a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul. Yeah, we want to be very much focused in on the spiritual life. At the same time, we need some other categories too. We are body and soul. That's why we do this show under the topic of wholeness and healing, like we do, to understand that unity and to go after advancing in the entire life of the human person that we are called to. And so yeah, life of physical health, of spiritual health, and of mental health. And I think this is just a category where we just need some reorientation. And I think that's what Dr. Crete is so helpful with, and his book is so helpful with, where it's getting our minds reoriented around this category of mental health. That mental health isn't just about people that have very serious disorders that need a very high level of help. This is a category that all of us need to think about and say, okay, mental health is something that I'm not perfect in, and there's more to go, there's more to grow, there's more to advance. And so how does this work? How does the inner world of my mental health, what is that supposed to look like? Where am I doing well? Where am I deficient? How can I receive some help, some healing that can help me to advance? It all works together. This is what it says in the foreword of the book here, Litanies of the Heart. It says that St. Thomas Aquinas is very clear. You cannot love God or your neighbor if you do not love yourself in an ordered way. And then in the preface, Dr. Crete invites the reader to join him on an inward journey to discover your spiritual center, which connects you with God and reflects his love and grace. And on this journey, you're going to learn that with God's grace, we can be relieved of any burdens of shame, fear, and self-hatred. And we learn how to love ourselves in a healthy, enriching way. I mean, really what it's talking about here is that advance in the virtue of charity, the theological virtue of charity. Yes, we need God's grace to do that, but also that there are some things pertaining to our mental health that could be preventing us from living that well, from advancing in that virtue of charity. Love of God for his own sake, love of ourselves in a proper way, which really needs to be understood well, and then also love of others out of love of God. And so we have to understand that this is a category that is vital to us living the life that we're called to, and it affects the way that we even advance in the spiritual life, that it all goes together. So Dr. Crete, I believe we've got you back with us. Thank you for this reorientation, this help that you are giving us to educate us in an area that many of us, we don't really have a healthy understanding of, which is the category of mental health and our own mental health and how to advance in it. And this sense of this proper love of self, I think, is an area that is an area that if we're honest, we may not want to look at too well, to say, how well are you properly loving yourself? Or even to think of it in terms of how well are you properly even receiving God's love for you and believing in God's love for you. And maybe not just at an intellectual level, but at an emotional level. Do you ever sense God's love for you? This would be normal, that we would sense God's love for us. And so if there are obstacles, if there are blockages, wouldn't we want to know about those things and be healed of those things so we can properly receive and even normally feel God's love as we're called to? We know in the spiritual life that there are ebbs and flows in terms of consolation and desolation, and that desolation is normal. To feel far from God at times is normal, but consolation really is the baseline. I mean, this is the teaching of St. Ignatius of Loyola now in the spiritual life, that we are normally to be feeling this sense of closeness to God. And so, yes, we want to be in a state of sanctified grace, that we want to confess our mortal sins in confession and be filled with his sanctifying grace. And that's going to help our ability to feel that closeness for sure. Again, St. Ignatius is teaching on that in the spiritual life is very, very valuable. But the sense that there is a baseline of consolation that would be normal. Dr. Crete, what would you say to somebody who says, intellectually, I love God, I believe in his love for me, but I do seem to have some sort of a block that is beyond like the regular ebb and flow in the spiritual life. And for some reason, I don't really ever feel close to God, and I don't really ever feel his love for me. Anything that you would be able to say to that in terms of any healing that might be needed in terms of mental health?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a big question and kind of an intersection with spiritual direction there and counseling and probably as well. But the way I look at it is, this parts work approach is a very spiritual approach. And we have parts and we talk about them as being sometimes blended with the self. And by the self, I'm really talking about the spiritual center of the person. And I have a whole chapter called the Inmost Self, and I really explore what that is, what St. Paul means by that, what the various saints in the church have meant by that. And it's a very powerful kind of understanding. St. Athanasius says it's the mirror of the soul. And we understand the sort of true self or inmost self or core self. And I think what happens is that our parts are so preoccupied, right? They're so burdened, perhaps, with something they're trying to manage or something they're trying to cope with, or some, healing that hasn't happened or whatnot. And what happens is they sort of like take over, if you will. They're more in charge. And really, our parts are not meant to be in charge. Our parts are beautiful aspects of who we are. They're meant to be resources. But instead, they end up being overburdened with the feeling that they have to manage everything. But when we call it unblending. So when we connect with our parts and we help them heal and we understand them and we start to understand them as these beautiful resources, and we help figure out what they need and we give that to them, then all of a sudden we have some distance between our innermost self, our core spiritual center, and our various parts. And then there's this sort of thing we call self-leadership, or we call it this inner harmony that happens. And once the innermost self is has some kind of distance, if you will, with those different parts, and yet a loving connection with them, then that innermost self is the place where we actually receive God's grace. I really do believe in our baptism that the innermost self is the sort of faculty of the soul where we actually receive the graces of faith, hope, and love. And so those graces then are received by our innermost core self, and they're able to be like given out to our various parts, and our whole system is able to feel that grace. And so it's a very profound thing, and we are able to connect with God. I see that innermost self, the Greek term for it is nous, as this innermost self being the faculty by which we connect with God. And so if you have a person that is saying, I don't feel God's presence at all, well, the first thing I would do is work with them to kind of figure out and understand their parts and connect with those parts and be able to then access their innermost self. And in my book, there's a chapter on this. There's even an exercise to help you connect with your innermost self. But you kind of have to go through the whole book to get all the way there, because it's not just a one and done. It's a major thing to kind of deeply connect with your innermost self. And our innermost self is really the place that best reflects the image of God imprinted on our soul. And so that inner self is most like Christ. Most in our baptism receives that prophet, priest, and king kind of mission to be able to give that to the whole self, so the whole person adopts that identity and is therefore then able to live out their true identity with others and love others in a more profound way. But it has to start there, where we have to love ourselves. And St. Thomas Aquinas actually gets into this, and he talks about loving oneself as a prerequisite to loving others. And he talks about self-friendship, which is an interesting concept, to have friendship with oneself. And he links that with Jesus's command to love your God and love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so St. Thomas actually links those things together. And so if we actually have true self-friendship, then we are actually connected in an integrated way with all of our inner parts.
Yeah. So let's follow this this thread just a little bit more, and then Becky, we'll get you in on the final segment. But following this thread a little bit, let's just keep an example here where, say, somebody is struggling with this, and I'm thinking this might be a common thing. I've definitely heard this from a lot of people about them not being they don't feel God's love for them. And then it affects their intellect. And then they start to believe, well, maybe he's not there. Maybe he doesn't love me and all of this, because they're not experiencing the feeling of it. Is it possible that it may be common that there is behind a lot of this, maybe a part in the person that doesn't believe that they deserve God's love, that doesn't believe that they deserve to feel God's love, and they may have some good intention for that part. I can't think of one of what they might be using as a good intention out of some hurt or something, and saying, okay, so I'm trying to shut down, I'm trying to protect you from feeling God's love for some reason. But is that a way to look at it? And if that were the case for somebody, that they had some part that was trying to stop them from feeling God's love for some reason, saying you don't deserve it, what would then be, how would you start to look at trying to heal that and trying to remedy that once you can identify that part exists?
Yeah, no, I think that's brilliant. I think most of us have parts that are very troubled with God and have a troubled relationship with God. We may have other parts that don't. We may have very strong spiritual parts that are, very religious or very committed and all that, and that's wonderful. But we often do have parts that, for whatever reason, don't believe in God or are very angry at God or something. I even talk about sometimes evangelizing our parts. So we, the way to approach that is always, in this model, is always to approach it with love. So we start off very gently and very carefully trying to connect with that part. Just like you kind of would if you were meeting somebody, like if you met somebody that was very angry at God or very, you were sort of trying to help them come to Christ, you wouldn't approach them and strong arm them. You wouldn't just, hit them with Bible verses and just convince them. You would actually start by trying to build a relationship with them. And then you would start by listening to their story.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Dr. Gerry Crete is with us. Again, the book Litany of the Heart. And you can get this book by going to sophiainstitute.com, sophiainstitute.com. We're going to have more with Dr. Crete when we get back. If you want to call in any question or comment that you would like to raise today, 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. Highly recommend this book. Great Easter book. Greater life, greater freedom by going through this book, Litanies of the Heart, Relieving Post-Traumatic Stress and Calming Anxiety Through Healing Our Parts. Again, sophiainstitute.com. We're going to be right back with Dr. Crete. Stay tuned. The Simple Truth. Jim and Becky Havens here talking to Dr. Gerry Crete, our special guest today, on his book, Litanies of the Heart, Relieving Post-Traumatic Stress and Calming Anxiety Through Healing Our Parts. You can get it at sophiainstitute.com, sophiainstitute.com. As always, whenever we discuss a book, especially, I would say, most especially this book, there's so much in here. We're just barely scratching the surface here today. And so again, I want to highly recommend that you would get this book and start diving into it. It really is a journey, and a journey to come to better understand and know yourself, your inner self, and the different parts within you, meaning a part of me thinks this, a part of me thinks that, a part of me feels this, a part of me feels that, and to get some identification on what's really going on there, and then to seek to understand it, and then to try to make sure it's integrated and that you have a sort of self-possession in the best possible way. If we want to receive God's love and give ourselves back in love to Him, well, you can't give what you don't have. You can't give what you don't possess. The more we possess ourselves, the more we can give ourselves in love to God and to others, to our neighbor. Our first neighbor for most of us is our spouse. The better your marriage is going to be. And then give yourselves to your children in your vocation. And again, this is something that I think affects the whole of our lives in ways that are so profound and so important, and that many of us we haven't been taught to be thinking about this, or to be trying to even understand this more and to work in this area of our lives. And I just think that this is something that has profound ramifications if we're willing to give it a bit of attention. And this is a great introduction to do so. A Litany of the Heart. Again, you can get it at sophiainstitute.com. Becky, any question that you have for Dr. Crete?
Sure. So just to kind of wrap my head around the part idea, is there some common like themes that people are experiencing like the same parts that are kind of like going off or that are kind of like more common in people, or is it like very individualized? And if there are some common themes for people, can you maybe just share a thing or two that people could just start themselves? Like, how can I kind of work through that? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I do think people most often have what I would call like a doer part. So they have, like, we call them managers sometimes. So there are parts that are very good at doing tasks and getting things done. And so we have parts like that. We also often have a part that often has a critical voice. So sometimes we call it a critic. And it sometimes sounds a little bit like a parent and is very negative and kind of puts us down and, criticizes us for everything. You're too thin, you're too big, you're too stupid, you're too, you shouldn't have done that. Or, why do you always do that? Why are you so stupid? So some awful voice like that we hear internally. And so what's interesting about those parts, right? Or another part we often have is a wall, that kind of like an avoidant part that keeps us kind of like shelled off from others. So, but even a critic, what we have to figure out, and what I think I show in this book, is that when we approach that part, we find out that its intention is to protect us. It may be doing it in a way that doesn't feel very nice, but its intention is to protect us from something. And when we figure out what it is, when we figure out what the part is trying to do and why and where it comes from, it's usually protecting some exile, like I was saying before, some more wounded part, and it's trying to prevent that part from being hurt. And when we connect with it, and the innermost self is able to connect with that, say, critic, then you have an opportunity there to literally, it sounds funny, but to ask that part, would you like to try something different? Would you like to try, what if you could get what you want done, which it wants to protect the exile from maybe shame or some kind of pain or something. If you could protect the exile from shame or pain or fear, but not be critical, would you be open to that? And it's amazing. The parts always say, yeah. And they say, okay, let's try something. And so we try something with them and show them what happens when you actually approach the problem with love and understanding and kindness, and you approach it in a Christ-like way. And then something beautiful happens, and the part that was the exile that's carrying the wound of shame or fear, what have you, suddenly is relieved through this different approach. And you discover this wounded part is really a beautiful child. It's just playful or just, wonderful in some way. And then all of a sudden the critic sees that. And all of a sudden now the system is shifting, and you turn to the critic and say, we still need you to protect this part. But we need you to protect this part in a new way, maybe in a way that is encouraging or loving or whatnot. And so the part has to take on a new role, and it's no longer a critic. It becomes something else, right? We're not banishing the part. We're not getting rid of the part. The part's been working really hard for a really long time as a critic, and thankless job that it is. And now all of a sudden you're showing this part a new way to go, and you're helping that part to do it. And you see the whole system changes. The whole internal system of the person starts to shift. And now this part is now an encourager or a coach or something like that, or a mentor. And then you see this child suddenly stops being an exile and starts to be able to come into the system, and you're able to work with it and include it. And the whole system is more happier, more joyful as a result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love thinking about this stuff. It is really fascinating, and I find it very, very practical as well. Like when you start to identify these things, it's very exciting, because it's like, yeah, I just never saw this before. I never realized this before. It opens up hope in new areas of your life, I would say. For instance, let's just keep with this example on the critic, where, and I love what you said earlier about this idea of kind of looking at it like evangelizing these parts in a way, because that's my instinct when you notice one of these exile parts or one of these protector parts sort of gone wrong, to say, I love you. Come on home. I love you. Come on home, which is what you would say to somebody who's apart from the church. I love you. Come on home. I mean, that's evangelization basically in a nutshell. And so when I would look at maybe a critic part like that and say, yeah, I noticed the good here. Come on home. And yeah, why don't we change your name to the watchdog? And you're going to look out for us, but you're going to tell us things like, hey, why don't you watch for this? Why don't you watch for that? But yeah, in a very integrated, loving way that's going to help us to see things, avoid pitfalls, stuff like that. Yeah, anything else? We only have a few minutes to go. So anything else that you want to make sure to comment on, to speak to the audience today before our time runs out?
Yeah, I pray for everyone listening, that we may not have PTSD or some other pathology, but I think we all are survivors of trauma. Like, I have a whole chapter called Original Trauma. So the idea behind that is, because of sin in the world, because of original sin, because of the way we are with each other, we all need healing. And then this is a powerful way to connect and bring a harmonious, new life, a new whole way of relating with yourself. So I really hope people engage it. And I love to hear people's stories of change. And I love to hear people's stories as they pray the litanies of the heart.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Can you comment on just the litanies of the heart for us as well, in terms of you bring us back with these 3 litanies of the heart. The book is entitled that, but you bring us back to these touchstones it really all comes back to really a cry out from the core of our being, crying out to God. And you bring the Psalms in. That's really what the Psalms are. Anything to just close us out with, anything on that aspect of the litanies of the heart?
Just that it's all about creating an attachment, a deep, secure attachment with Christ, who loves us and wants to bring healing and connection to our lives.
Awesome. Yeah, Dr. Gerry Crete, Litanies of the Heart, relieving post-traumatic stress and calming anxiety through healing our parts. Again, highly recommend it. SophiaInstitute.com is where you can find it. SophiaInstitute.com. Dr. Crete, thank you so much for all of your good work, for taking the time to come on with us today, answer a few questions, and share your wisdom with us. We greatly appreciate it.